My name is Brooke Heffington, Managing Director for Real Assets Advisor, extending a warm welcome to those joining in and a special thank you to ADISA and Spotlight Marketing for their partnership in facilitating today's webinar. When discussions began regarding webinar topics, in particular a 1031 webinar, a question, does our industry want to know more? And do they feel informed, arose? Well, over 270 registrants spoke up with a resounding yes was the answer. As John and I reside here in the state of Georgia, we'd never fathomed all eyes would be on us, as Georgia is shaping up to be ground zero for whether Congress will be divided again next year or whether the Democrats will hold the majority in both the House and Senate. Control of the Senate remains undecided until vote counts in North Carolina and Alaska are completed, and 2 seats in Georgia are decided during the January 5th runoff election. In the event of a 50-50 split, the vice president would cast tie-breaking votes in the chamber. Real Assets Advisor and ADISA will continue bringing you the most accurate news and regulatory updates in anticipating the 100th anniversary of the 1031 Exchange Tax Code in 2021. Read your October issue of Real Assets Advisor magazine featuring the 911 for 1031s, or downloaded our podcast, The Election and Implications for 1031s? Connect with me, Brooke Heffington, and visit our website at realassетsadvisor.com for more information. Now on to our event. Post-election, what lies ahead for 1031 exchanges is today's featured webinar. Guests are moderator, John Grady, partner at Practus, LLP, featured speaker, Ryan McCormick, Senior Vice President and Counsel, the Real Estate Roundtable. Panelists are ADISA President, Larry Sullivan, President of Passco Companies, Dan Wagner, SVP Government Relations, the Inland Real Estate Group of Companies. Real Assets Advisor is a proud member of ADISA and pleased to introduce one of our inaugural board members, sponsors, and my friend here in the ATL, John Harrison. John is Executive Director of ADISA, a role he's been in for almost 8 years. ADISA during that time has grown almost threefold in terms of reach, membership, and budget, and is a proud member of the Real Estate Roundtable's Coalition on 1031s. John also does academic research on industry issues. John, take it away.
Thanks so much, Brooke, and thanks to Real Assets Advisor and also to all our guests, including our sister group, the coalition, which is headed by the Real Estate Roundtable in Washington. And this panel will be headed by Mr. John Grady. John Grady, I've known for a number of years. He is our past president of ADISA, winner of our top ACE award, Champion of Excellence, Distinguished Service Award, a fellow enophile. We have a going contest, and I think we're tied up. So we can't wait to meet again to see which does better, the Tuscan wines or of course, the red Bordeaux, which we all know is the secret winner most every time. But John, I want to turn it over to you. John has been at a number of important and prestigious law positions. He currently is a principal at Practus, which specializes in securities law, which is John's background. Mr. Grady.
Thank you, John. And I'd be remiss if I didn't make mention of the fact that the New World wines, those from Mr. Sullivan's jurisdiction, always have a place at the table in any taste-off. But thank you to my panelists. Thank you to all of our attendees, and to Brooke and Real Assets Advisor for their sponsorship as well. What we're going to do today is, as mentioned, we're going to go into both sort of what is 1031 doing on the table, if it is on the table, and why, and then what we might expect if we hypothesize potentially congressional scrutiny on that section, and what some of the outcomes might look like if that scrutiny in fact occurs. We're pleased to have first kicking us off and kind of bringing us up to date on election events and how they're going to affect this discussion, to have Ryan McCormick, as mentioned, Senior Vice President and Counsel at the Real Estate Roundtable, but also prior to joining the Roundtable in 2013, Ryan was on the Hill for a number of years, including working in economic and tax advisory roles for Senators Graham, Moynihan, Kerry, Lieberman, and Nelson, as well as staff director of the Senate Finance Subcommittee on Fiscal Responsibility and Economic Growth. So Ryan, thank you. We're going to ask you to kind of, as I said, set the stage, and then we're going to devolve into a panel discussion, including Larry Sullivan, President of Passco, and Dan Wagner, Senior VP Government Relations at Inland, so we can go a little bit deeper into the questions around 1031. So with that, Ryan, if you would, take us away.
Great. Well, oops. Great. Well, thank you, John. Thanks for that introduction. We've got a tremendous panel and a lot of people with a really tremendous real-world expertise here. So I'll keep it fairly brief, take 5 or 10 minutes and kind of set the stage for where we stand policy-wise on this issue in Washington, and look forward to a great conversation. So, President-elect Biden, who he really comes in with an ambitious tax agenda that he introduced kind of gradually over time during the primary and general election season. And that agenda includes raising the capital gains rate, repealing the 20% pass-through deduction, raising ordinary rates, raising payroll tax rates on high income earners, and of course, repealing the ability to defer gain through like-kind exchanges. Now, that proposal on 1031 comes on the heels of major changes to 1031 in the last Congress, in which it was repealed for all assets other than real property. Recall that occurred in the 2017 tax bill, in which we had a kind of Republican unified government. But before we ended up there, full repeal, including all assets, including real property, had been on the table, at least at the initial part of that process. It also comes after the last Democratic administration, the Obama administration, had proposed capping deferred gain under Section 1031 at $1 million annually. So for all those reasons, this is an area we've had heightened focus and a lot of emphasis from our industry in trying to raise awareness of the benefits and importance of 1031. That said, we will likely have divided government for the next 2 years, and this point was made during the introductory comments. The ability to move this President Biden, Vice President-elect Biden's tax plan has really been greatly reduced, most likely from the election outcome. The majority in both chambers is diminished. At most, Republicans are going to have 52 seats in the Senate at best. On the Democratic side, their best outcome would be a split chamber 50-50, in which the vice president would cast the deciding vote over control. There had been talk about a filibuster being eliminated. I think the filibuster is safe for now. I also think it's unlikely that we will have a budget reconciliation bill. For those not familiar with what that term means, that's basically the process by which a big tax bill can pass the Senate without a supermajority, without 60 votes. That can be done under budget reconciliation. That's how most big tax bills over the years have passed. And it looks very unlikely that we're going to have a big budget reconciliation bill in the coming year. So the House side is also kind of interesting, what we see there. As of this morning, the AP had the House tally at 218 Democrats, 201 Republicans, with 17 seats still to be called, but 12 of those were leaning Republican. So if you play that out to the end, you get to a House majority of 223 versus about 213 on the Republican side, which is only a 5-seat majority for the Speaker of the House going into 2021, which is razor thin. The Speaker would not be able to lose more than 5 votes to pass legislation in the House. So we're going to have most likely a very greatly divided Congress going into next year. I just note you do have Senate Democrats, a handful of them that won or that are governing in states won by President Trump. So, the notion that they're going to jump on board with a very aggressive tax increase plan is also unlikely. And those include Sherrod Brown from Ohio, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, John Tester from Montana, and possibly a couple senators from Arizona, depending on how that state ends up at the end of the day, Kristen Sinema and Mark Kelly. So the overperformance of Republicans will really make the Biden tax agenda that much harder to pass. But I think the focus does shift now to what can be done on a bipartisan basis at the leadership level. There are things that congressional Republicans want to accomplish in the coming year. Think about liability protections for businesses dealing with COVID. That's a very high priority for Senate Majority Leader McConnell. I also note that there's going to be a lot of pressure going forward to address the budget deficit and to kind of offset the cost of legislation. And that's something we haven't seen very much in 2020. We had a lot of very large bills to finance the COVID relief effort that were not paid for. And to the extent that this administration really wants to move forward on kind of aggressive spending initiatives, whether they're infrastructure or education or childcare or whatever they may be, there's going to be a lot of pressure to find revenue and tax provisions to do that. I just also note every major tax bill over the last 30 years has come in the first year of a presidential administration. Sometimes those are tax cuts, sometimes they're tax increases, but I also note they also occurred during a divided Congress. We saw that with President Clinton. We saw that with President Obama in 2013. He had a divided Congress, and we got major tax bills coming out of those. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that we could have, a brokered significant tax bill. All that means that all that is to say that we will be very focused on what happens here, continuing to raise awareness with people like John Harrison and you all's help, kind of helping lawmakers understand what 1031 means to the economy, to investment, to the liquidity of real estate markets, to net investment, to jobs through capital expenditures. We can talk about the kind of substantive issues there, but I think, I just wanted to set the table here a little bit for the political environment kind of going into 2021 and why we're particularly focused on this provision and kind of the outlook going forward. So thank you, John.
And thank you, Ryan. So first to you, Larry, what we've just heard is sort of a collection of information that might make you think that sort of everything and nothing's on the table. Why would 1031 find itself on the table? Why does it keep showing up when folks are looking at the tax code, and why would it potentially show up this time?
Is that directed at me?
Sorry, that was directed to Larry. I apologize.
All right. Yeah, I had to unmute myself. Everything Ryan said is true. I generally agree with it. And for 1031s, I think where it all started is, Joe Biden was asked once about 1031s and said, oh, I'd get rid of that. But subsequent to that, all the research I've seen and the people I've spoken with on the 1031 front as it relates to the Democratic side seems to be centered more on this limiting concept, which Ryan referred to out of Obama, even where they tried to limit it to 1 million or 2 million, and the Biden side has this kind of mysterious $400,000 income somehow coming into play. We don't know what that means, but I think at the end of the day, it's back on the table because in the elderly and child care initiatives that the Biden administration is proposing, they're specifically targeting real estate as the pay for or the primary pay for. And therefore, that's where 1031 kind of comes back into the picture under that auspice. But again, at the end of the day, it's all about whether it's unified or divided government at this point. And if we'll get into it later, we can talk about that as it relates to Georgia more than anything.
Staying on that theme, Larry, for just a minute, you were involved in the 2017, shall we say, tax negotiations that ultimately made significant changes to 1031. Can you remind us just economically what it looks like if you're trying to sort of find things to use as pay-fors? When you say real estate is a pay-for, what is it about 1031 and how big a pay-for does it represent?
Well, 1031s back in, I guess, 17 included all sorts of other things other than real estate, right? So it included equipment, cars, things like that, the collectibles. So when they search for tax cuts and then they've kind of got to balance things out, real estate and 1031s was a place to find money, theoretically find money at least. And but what was interesting out of that, most interesting, I think, is originally 1031s as a tax bucket was a place to get a pay for. There was money there we could pay for our tax initiatives. But what happened is when they cut it down to just real estate, it ended up being a net pay, the opposite. It was contributing. And that was interesting that somehow when Congress manipulated their numbers, as they're so good to do, they ended up saying, oh, now that we're down to just 1031s for real estate, it actually contributes. And I think if I remember right, it was $0.7 billion. But I could be wrong.
Well, and then Dan, I want to follow up with you, but Larry, just to close that out, if that was the view then, does that remain the view now? And is there any reason why 1031 is still seen as a go-to to pay for things, or is it going to be repainted as a go-to in order to sort of achieve another purpose?
Well, anything can happen, John. I mean, that I hate to say I don't have a good answer, but it's really that anything can happen. 1031s is on the field of play, a target. If there is a divided government, I think that lessens significantly. From what I'm hearing from people I speak with, tax reform as of, we did this before, John, 11/10/20
Right.
at 11:17 a.m. looks like it's not a primary target. It looks like it's not a spring agenda target. That's what I'm hearing, which pushes it to the back end of the year. So what I'm hearing they're going to focus on is COVID, number one. They ran on COVID, and they better show results. And what I'm hearing is number two is infrastructure. That seems to be where they're leaning more than tax reform. Remains to be seen. So
Dan, Ryan mentioned that tax reform is often a first year subject for Congress. Kind of same question I put to Larry, but looking at it from your standpoint and at 1:20 or so Central Time, how do you see 1031 getting on the table? And do you see it being looked at differently than it was looked at in 2017? And any other thoughts you have on sort of how we might see it finding its way into the sort of, maybe if not public scrutiny, at least the scrutiny of the Gucci Gulchers this time around?
Well, thank you, John. And also I want to thank Brooke, Real Assets Advisor, and Adisa for hosting us today. It's pretty amazing to think that this is like Groundhog Day again, that we're back at trying to save the 1031, which a lot of credit goes towards the Real Estate Roundtable in saving that in 2017. You had the Real Estate Roundtable. I call Jeff DeBoer kind of like King Arthur of the Knights of the Round Table, and Ryan McCormick would be like Sir Lancelot. So Ryan, we need you back with your sword. It's just mind-boggling to me the amount of studies and work that we've all done and the industry has done, and the Real Estate Roundtable is spearheaded, that this is looked at again as a pay for these different items that the Biden campaign wants to do. So the Biden campaign in February gave their tax policy to the Brookings Institute. And the Brookings Institute really in March kind of shot the flare up, warning everybody that, hey, the Biden campaign wants to eliminate the 1031. They want to get rid of stepped up and basis and all the things that Ryan talked about. And what we've been trying to do through the Institute for Portfolio Alternatives, we've done some Zoom calls. The Federation of Exchange Accommodators have been incredible. We've done Zoom calls with the Democrat leaders of the House Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee. And right away, you find that they are interested in looking for pay-fors, as Larry talked about, because I think the possibility exists is that people think, well, Donald Trump is Mr. Commercial Real Estate guy. We got to clip those this loophole, that there's somehow something wrong with real estate. And we have found that once you start talking to these very smart individuals that are very involved in their own business activities too, a lot of them ended up having done 1031s. But we have found that when we've talked to like, for example, the senators from Virginia, we identified that about 6 QIs did a study, and they found that in 18 and 19, there's over $6 billion worth of 1031s in Virginia. And that really woke up the senators and say, wow, we had no idea it was that much. And then when the National Association of Realtors did a study to find out that over 60-some% of their members have been involved with the 1031, that again woke them up. It's like, wow, that's very interesting. And so when they start recognizing, and we educate members about the microeconomic study with Lean Petrova, and then also the Ernst & Young global, macroeconomic study, I think that's going to be the key to our success is educating, because over 100 years this has been in the tax code, and every 20 years ago they wanted to get rid of it, and the people that saved it, I understand, are the farmers and conservationists, and they tried to get rid of it in 2016, and thank God for the Real Estate Roundtable and IPA, ADISA, the National Association of Realtors, all these different groups. Because once you start really getting into the meat and potatoes of this is not the Republican 1031 program. It's not the Democrat 1031 program. It's the 1031 program that has helped the economy in so many ways.
Thank you, Dan. And Ryan, it's obviously not an easy question, but I'll pose it anyway. We have still some rather divisive presidential politics to deal with, and we've been talking so far primarily about the congressional politics, and Dan's point about educating members. Does the sort of the climate around the presidential race, does that also impact how Congress might pick up items of tax reform? And any thoughts you could share would be welcome.
Well, I don't think 1031 has been a focus of presidential candidates or Congress per se in and of itself. I mean, you don't really hear them talking or challenging or really discussing substantively, are these exchanges a good thing or a bad thing? It really came up in 2017 in the context of base broadening tax reform, where the idea was we're going to find as many tax expenditures as we can, eliminate them, lower the tax rates. And so that was the starting point, and why I think 1031 was really on the table then. But we're kind of past that point now. It was litigated, at least by one party. It was, very heavily litigated, prosecuted, and the decision was made to land where they did on 1031. Going into 2021, it's really come up, I think, in the context of the vice president wanting to show some sense that the proposals he was putting out there were, he was going to be fiscally responsible about them and how they went about financing those. But that is a big difference between having it be part of a policy position paper from a presidential candidate to becoming law. And I'm a creature of the Capitol Hill, so I'm maybe a little biased on this point, but the tax laws really are written by the tax writers at the Senate Finance and House Ways and Means Committee. And the president really kind of comes in at the end of the day and he approves or he doesn't approve the bill, and he can set some direction for where it's going. But it's really, this issue is really one, and Dan has been great about this, John and others. It's blocking and tackling and talking to individual lawmakers that are on the tax writing committees. And, for the most part, once you explain to them how this provision is used, and I just add, we're in a very weak economic period. We think like-kind exchanges are particularly important during periods of economic stress. That's because you don't have a lot of real estate activity transactions going on otherwise. But like-kind exchanges create a demand for transactions that wouldn't otherwise occur. Someone sells a property, they want to reinvest the proceeds, and they've got to go out and find a new property, a new acquisition very quickly. So we think members of Congress get that, and when push comes to shove, there's not going to be tremendous appetite for changing course on this. It's been around since I just want to also add, it's been around since 1921. So as long as we've been taxing capital gains, we've been able to defer gain on like-kind exchanges. So I'm bullish on being able to carry this forward for the foreseeable future.
Well, if we have time at the end, we'll discuss the pros and cons of throwing a 100th birthday party for 1031. But before we get into kind of what might happen if it finds its way on the table, can you, Ryan, tell us some names to be looking out for? I mean, last time in 2017, we kind of felt like we knew the tax writers, right? You mentioned Ways and Means in the House. You mentioned Senate Finance. do we have a sense that there'll be changes in some of the names we should be listening for?
Well, I'll tell you, we were really thought we were going to see changes in the Senate, where we would have had a change in leadership at the committee, and Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon would have become the chair. And he has some very bold ideas on capital gains, but Oregon, it turns out, tends to be one of the largest users as a state, and really the West Coast generally, of like-kind exchanges. And it's really interesting. Our research has shown that. So we have pretty strong support, I think, from West Coast, from lawmakers from out west on this provision. But it's kind of hard for me to identify specific members of Congress to focus on. Nobody out there has a repeal 1031 bill per se. The risk is more that in the context of negotiations, kind of outside of the normal process, the normal markup of legislation, that somehow they were to put this on the table. So it's really about focusing on the leaders as well as the leadership of the tax writing committees. Chairman Richie Neal of Massachusetts, Kevin Grady of Texas in the House. We have a new finance chairman, Mike Crapo of Idaho. So that's someone that certainly Dan, you, others will want to, if you don't know, you may already have relationships with these members, but you'll certainly want to be talking to them and making sure they're familiar with the importance of the provision.
Great. Well, we're going to definitely talk about what some of the folks on the phone might be able to do in the coming weeks and months. But I think our focus can shift for a minute anyway, or for rather a substantial number of minutes, from why would it get there and might it get there to the idea, almost the assumption that 1031 gets on the table either as a chip or it gets there on the table because somebody decides it really needs a reworking, and we'll posit as a working assumption the idea that the worst case scenario is contemplated, and that is a either complete or partial repeal. Larry, can you remind us, going back to 2017, what did a partial repeal of 1031 look like? You mentioned that folks had floated the idea of limiting its benefits. How was that proposed when that was on the table?
In 17 or in Obama?
Starting with Obama, sorry, I said 17, I meant 13.
Yeah. So, under Obama, where it drifted was limiting it. I believe it was 1 million a year. It might've been 2, and I never really got far enough to get along with it. But that's where they went. And I always look at that as an interesting point or a data point, because when you're talking about politics and Democrats, Republicans, the Democrats back then had complete control. They obviously veered to Obamacare because it was more of a legacy thing for President Obama. And we just said Obamacare, so he got what he wanted.
He got what he wanted.
He got what he wanted. But back then, they really moved towards limiting. And I always look at that even today. Now, we're much more progressive, in terms of the Democrats. But as Ryan said, my prognostication is they're probably only going to have 5 to 10 margin. It's very, very tight. It's not the same world. But they did go to limit it, which gets me in my head of, if it does come to the table, it's probably more in the limiting kind of side. Dan made one comment I would double down on, which is, let's say quite a few members of Congress and the Senate use 1031 exchanges. I only put that out there as a point of view. They use it. It's part of what they do in life. And then the flip side of that, I would say, is one thing I learned in 17 from speaking with Ways and Means and the Budget Committee members and staff, I guess, was that it was very important when you're battling for what you want in life in a Washington, D.C. sense, to come at it 3 ways. One is relationships, right? Talking to various senators and congresspeople. And the more you can get to the power brokers is better. Number 2 is information, all the things we talked about, Petrova studies, different things like that. But the one that really stuck out in my head, and it happened way at the end of 17 before they actually voted, was talking to some members of the Budget Committee, which wasn't Ways and Means, but they're affiliated. And they said, and I didn't say this, so I'm only going to tell you what they told me. They said, Larry, at the end of the day, as important it was to listen to the suits and the dresses, that's how they phrased it. What really stuck with us all is when we learned about the people. Somebody earlier said about farmers back in another iteration. It was the people that walked in and said, I'm not a millionaire or billionaire, you know, because that was kind of the big theme. You know, I'm somebody that makes 200,000 a year. Most of Passco investors are in their 60s and 70s. They're relying on income. And when they heard those stories from real people, it really resonated. So I think moving forward from here, we have to be cognizant of that holy trinity of approaches and taking it in composite so that when we prepare for battle, if there ever is a battle, and I say we're prepared no matter what, right? I think we're prepared for a battle. If it never comes, we're all pleased. We can't forget that third piece. I always remember what they said. And I think we have to prepare for that on our, I'll call it the grassroots side of what we do.
Practically speaking, Larry, just use whatever number was in vogue. How were limits proposed? Were they limits on the number of times you could use 1031, on the amount you could defer? How was that idea of a limit brought into the discussion?
It was more of, if you think about tax reform, and Ryan's lived it more than I did. I got a education in 16, 17, but things seem to progress through limits. You know, how much is your home interest write-off? Oh, it used to be unlimited, then it was limited, then it was limited some more, and then it was limited some more. And you get on this path of progressive limitation, as I call it. So I think that 1031s were going down that same route, you know, of limiting them. First step in the process, limit them to $1 million or $2 million of gain. Nobody quite got to the point of understanding it, of what it actually meant, because it left the building, the limitation theory. But if you look at some of Biden has a transition plan out. I don't think it was the transition plan. I think it was an actual one of his pieces on tax. And they talked or whispered, if you read the words, and I've got really good at parsing words and text and understanding how they drift around in political speak. They were talking about preserving things like tax things like 1031s, not specifically named, but in that context, that genre, for people making less than 400. That was the limit. The limit shifted to an income limit. But what interesting, what they also said, and we'll phase it out over 400,000. Phase it out, which is just a concept, just a bunch of words. Phase it out, 3 words, but nobody quite knows what it means. But that's the kind of speak or jargon I'm seeing around the edges, as opposed to eliminate.
So Dan, on that theme, you mentioned the power of presenting the numbers. Is that something that depends on an unlimited version of 1031, or were you already seeing some of the power that Larry's talking about of the smaller but nonetheless vital taxpayers showing up to make those numbers that you felt were having an impact on people's thinking?
So Larry brought up a really good point. Having real world examples, really the qualitative discussions, and really the people that are listening to us right now. If we were in a room, I'd say, hey, how many people, raise your hand if you know your congressman or woman, how many people know your senator? I mean, it really behooves everyone on this call who wants to keep the 1031 exchange alive and well to really go and make a relationship with your member of Congress, with their staff members, because sometimes staff members are even, as Larry mentioned, even more important than the member. But it's so valuable because everybody that's in this industry, 99.9%, we are caring about our clients. We want to care about our investor. And there's so many wonderful stories of how Inland and how Passco, how we all worked hard to help people. And it's that story that has to get out there. Of course, we'll have 10,000 realtors walk Capitol Hill last time to save the 1031. We'll have NAREIT and their brilliant people. When Jeff DeBoer speaks, people listen. I mean, we're going to have all these different groups that are going to be fighting for us. And then, of course, the other wonderful aspect that people don't think about in our real estate world is the agricultural folks. You're going to have them and the conservationists like they did before. And it's all this coalition of people talking. I know the CPAs, the tax lawyers, they all see the benefit of what the 1031 does. And we all have to work really together and Ryan helps bring us all together to figure that out. But I'm very much one that the idea of capping something at $400,000 income. And I mean, when you're, especially with DSTs, when you're looking at accredited investors, but while most accredited investors usually get that through net worth, you still have a variety of them that wouldn't happen if you stopped it at 400,000, because we've had DSTs that have hit 40 million before. So it's important to see the synergies of what happens to the economy, to the 1031 it's acting as really the catalyst to make things happen. When you see that the Link Petrova study said that basically owners maintain and buyers renovate, you got 30 different jobs that are created when a 1031 happens. And all that creates money going into the economy, with income taxes being paid by the realtor, by this lawyer, all the way down to the people that are selling things at your Home Depot to fix up a house or building or whatever it is that you're going to do. So it's vital that we all work together. We don't lose, keep our eye on the prize of keeping the 1031, and that's really the most important thing. Is, as you know, in The Godfather, it says, go to the mattresses. Well, we're going to go to the mattresses to save the 1031. That's it. We're all going to be working together.
Hey, Dan, great points. And one way I think about it is, not everyone can go out and borrow unlimited amounts of money at 1% interest rate, the way the federal government or a lot of large corporations can. Like-kind exchanges create a access to finance for growing businesses that for people who might otherwise be, to some extent, cash poor. It creates a pot of financing for investments that are growing and for businesses that are growing. And we really think of it as a ladder of economic opportunity for entrepreneurs. And in that way, when members of Congress think about it in that context, I think it helps them understand that this is a way for non-corporate partnerships, individuals, sole proprietors, pass-through businesses that don't necessarily have just unlimited access to very low interest rate financing, but want to put money at risk and put capital and deploy capital.
Well, and let me throw out one more thing. The 1031 should never go away. But even now, the Biden campaign put together their plan before COVID. So even now with COVID, I mean, we've been having this problem with our commercial real estate world, and it's just it's pretty challenging. You want to have the 1031 to be able to position properties. Besides COVID, you have the total changing dynamic of retail. Well, the people that are owning those malls and everything else that need to be maybe turned into more of a place for people to live, in apartments or condos, whatever. The 1031 is used as a major tool for REITs that are going to reposition themselves. And the REITs, that might be considered, these big companies, but guess what? The REITs, their bottom line is that they have pension funds that are vested with them. So police and fire pension people get their mailbox money to pay. They pay their bills. They buy their groceries with that money, and that's police and fire. That's teachers, and the REITs to help reposition everything is a big deal. So you can see how it helps the big companies, and then it helps the mom and pop that have, as Larry said, that your investors, Larry, and ours, they're not cajillionaires doing DSTs. There are some cajillionaires, but it's really the mainstream of America that's doing this stuff. And the more we can do the qualitative analysis to say, hey, these are the data points, that's really good.
Hey, terrific.
John, just one quick comment to close this out. Flying even higher at a higher level, politically speaking, that you've got to look at, if it ends up being that way, the Biden-Harris administration coming in. And the biggest thing they want from a big picture is an economy that continues to grow. They're coming off Trump having to recognize a 33% GDP or whatever it was. It's likely to still be very, very high for the fourth quarter. They're not about to want to do things in the first quarter, probably even the second quarter, that starts dropping those numbers down, because their political collateral in a divided government, I'm with Ryan, I think we're going to end up divided government, is not beneficial to them. So the subject of 1031s, or the subject of things that could affect 1031s, are quite a bit down from the big picture things they're going to want to accomplish, in my opinion.
Thank you, Larry, because that leads me into sort of our second layer of hypothetical discussion, which is assuming that we're unsuccessful in taking everybody's eyes off 1031 altogether, and assuming that the idea of some limits is not enough to save it, but rather it goes under the knife and out of the code it goes. Larry, you want to speculate a little bit on what the timing of that kind of action? Again, very hypothetical. A lot of folks here and on the call would say they hope it never comes to pass. But if it were to come to pass, you know, what's our experience with the way that things that provide tax breaks and are then taken out of the code? How is that done in a way either to minimize the impact or to maximize the hit to revenue that had been generated and now is going to be eliminated? So a little bit, if you wouldn't mind.
Potential timing
Yes.
of addressing tax fraud.
And as you're thinking of your answer, I want to encourage folks on the line, if you want to send me a question to my email address in the chat box, please do. We do want to leave some time at the end. I have some questions from those who submitted them ahead of time, but I'm happy to take more if you'd like to email me or reach out to me through the Zoom chat box. So Larry, again, thoughts on the timing we might see in this regard.
If it was to occur, I think I might have said it earlier, I don't see it on the spring agenda. It's in the later in the year agenda, 2020. I'd go with Ryan. Most of the times it happens in the first year. It seems to happen late in the first year. It is a long process, especially divided government. My God, it's much longer. So I would say the earliest is the end of 21, if it happens at all, but I'll go into 21.
And if there's an end to 21, does it tend to be, okay, it's gone and that's it, calendar year, we're done? Or is there often an attempt to cushion the impact of something like that? Ryan, same question for you.
It can go either way. If you look historically, it can go either way. I would say it's almost non-existent a chance to go retroactive on something like that. So it would be a 2022 implementation. But there can be cases where they kind of ease into things. Ryan's probably more eloquent than even I am on that. But they can certainly put things in that kind of phase in over time or sunset, because the Trump tax cuts sunset at 2025, I think. So for the most part.
And Ryan, if you wouldn't mind, not just addressing that point that Larry teed up, but also sort of how do people in that position of trying to wonder, can they do something now in the thought that it might not sort of be there to work in by the time they get around to it? How do people working in the space deal with such a thing as sunsetting or with sort of immediate and even retroactive rescission or the end to a particular code provision?
Yeah. Well, a couple comments. One is, I think the weakness of the economy changes the thinking on this in Congress, such that any kind of tax increases are really going to be incremental, be phased in over time, and are quite, in my view, quite small risk of those happening. So that said, I mean, I think we're talking about not having an impact on any kind of transactions in 2021. I think we're talking about further into 2022. I also believe, my recollection is that with the 2017 changes, that there was some transition relief, provided that it was contracts that had been entered into prior to like the date of enactment. So there is a time period, even though the provision itself may be effective, provided certain steps with regard to that transaction have been taken, that a contract's been entered into, that there is relief for those, and then those would continue to qualify.
And just as an aside, that seems to be somewhat typical of tax legislation, where there'll be a cutoff date, and if transactions were entered into prior to the cutoff date, they're treated differently than those that might be entered into thereafter. Is that just our recent experience, or is there a tradition of that occurring?
Yeah, I think that's right. Capital gains is a little bit different. Sometimes Congress will try to avoid a rush to the exits where people are trying to sell assets to take advantage of the lower rates. So I've seen legislation introduced by senior tax writers in the past where they say effective on the date of introduction, this is the new rule, because they're trying to avoid people trying to take advantage of that small window of time before the law goes into effect. So, I mean, there's a lot of different scenarios you can play out. I don't have a firm answer to what would necessarily be done. All I can say is directionally, I think that there is, for reasons that Larry mentioned, a lot of reluctance to doing things on the tax side that are going to be have a really negative effect on the economy and jobs right now.
Dan, can you see that theme playing out in the kinds of discussions that you were saying earlier, where the ability to point to the economic benefits has been important? Can you see that being heightened, where a new administration would be loath to sort of push for something that might have a diminishment effect on activity?
So coming at it from a Midwest point of view, I'm always I'm always conservative. I'm very conservative when it comes to this stuff. We have a president, a possible president-elect is what it looks like. President Biden will become our next president. And he has a campaign platform. And in that platform, he says he wants to eliminate the 1031 like-kind exchange and eliminate the stepped-up basis for capital gains. That's what he's put out there. It's scary. It keeps me up at night now that's in there. All the things that we talked about clearly are helpful, and clearly I totally agree with Ryan. I agree with Larry that I can't imagine that they would want to mess with the economy. They want something that's going to be positive for them, but they still have that in their platform. And if we don't gain the majority in this, if the Republicans don't get the majority in the Senate, I think Katie barred the door. I think they're going to try to do a lot of stuff. Because you saw that the vitriol in politics is something that I haven't. I mean, it's worse than it's ever been. So it's very important that I think from now on we recognize that tax reform is going to be always on the table. The idea for people in this business, we're going to be constantly educating members of Congress and their staff all the time about the 1031. We're going to be living, eating, and breathing this every day, because we can't let people get into the thought process that this could go away. Once, you could have a congressman or senator, and I've had 20 or 25 of them in the last 3 months that have said, oh no, we're not going to get rid of the 1031. But if they bake the pie, and Ryan knows this better than anybody, if they're going to bake the pie of tax reform and they actually grab that ingredient of taking the 1031 and saying, we're going to use that, and then it comes out in the light of day, it's like a big Jenga puzzle. You're not going to have that one congressman or woman who want to protect it. They're not going to go and say, oh, let's put this Jenga piece back. The members of the tax writing committee, as Ryan said, they're hugely powerful. They're going to say, are you nuts? We have this thing is balanced like it's unbelievable. So it's our duty really as an industry to work together to make sure that ingredient that they want to reach for to bake that cake of the 1031 going away, we got to keep that off of the ingredient list. And we just have to keep, no matter what, talking about it, because once in Washington, once they start talking about getting rid of something, it's in the lexicon in Washington. And it started with the Republicans. The Republicans, they said Camp's plan years ago was to say, get rid of the 1031. And as Ryan said, they said that. So that's where we, went full force to educate people. And now the Democrats are saying, hey, we want to get rid of the 1031 and pay for stuff. Because there's a ton of stuff that Vice President Biden, he wants to have free school, I mean, there's a lot of stuff he wants to do. And I'm not saying any of that's bad, but I'm just saying it's going to really kill us in the economy if you do that. So anyway, I could go on, but yeah, I think we all have to just recognize that it is when it's out there and it's put out there, it keeps me up at night. It scares me.
we're going to come back in a minute to the question, particularly I want to hear from Larry on what those on the call can do, not just the call to reach out to those in Congress or the administration, but rather they can do within their own workplace or among those who they might talk to about these issues. But before we get to that, there's been typically a willingness to see that an alternative to a 1031 might be looking at the opportunity zone option, right? They're not intended to govern the same transaction, but in terms of large deferral type provisions in the tax code, the opportunity zones do provide their own sort of sirens call to those looking to defer. I'll start with you, Dan. Is the opportunity zone world as likely to come under scrutiny as 1031, or are they very different?
Well, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought it up. So from what I can, and again, there's nothing, as Ryan would say, nothing's in writing to do anything. It's just as what I've read and gleaned from the media, the very progressive part of the Democrat Party, AOC wants to eliminate the 1031 is the latest thing that I've read. But then Vice President Biden, I think, views the opportunity zone as an economic development tool. And I believe that he would not get rid of it. I believe, though, that if I understand it correctly, they would change it to possibly be more engaged with community organizations, where you would have nonprofit organizations that would get possibly direct money from whatever opportunity zone project is being done. But those are just some general things that I've picked up. I haven't seen anything particular, but one of the things that I know is that Vice President Biden will have a new Secretary of the Treasury, and the Treasury will be able to tinker around with the different rules and the way it's handled, I believe. And Ryan can address that better than I can. But I think you also have new census tracts that are going to be coming out. And there's been interest where on both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republicans, that they'd like to see that maybe some of the opportunity zone areas move around. But I think in general, I believe that people see the positiveness of it. If there was going to be any change, I think it would be more towards but the humanistic aspect, to put money towards putting up like 30% affordable housing if you build apartments or something like that. But Ryan, you might have a better explanation than I do.
Yeah, Ryan, good question, Dan. Ryan, same question to you.
Yeah, so do I think opportunity zones could come under similar pressure as like-kind exchanges? I don't. I think that I'm bullish on opportunity zones. I do think reform could be possible, but I do think there's bipartisan support for those. And kind of the difference there is it is really perceived as a economic development program for kind of low-income communities. It's by no means perfect. It's been criticized for contributing to gentrification and for having the benefits not necessarily flowing to those who live in those communities. Those are all valid issues that need to be examined. But it's the latest in a long line of place-based tax incentives, which we've had over the years, from empowerment zones, enterprise zones, new markets tax credit. This one's got, I think, a little bit more juice to it in the capital gains benefit. And as a result, you're seeing a lot more participation. It also doesn't go through a vetting process for every single individual project through Treasury, the way the new markets tax credit has. So you have scale issues that you can achieve with opportunity zones. What I hear mostly about opportunity zones now is from lawmakers who have areas in their districts that are not opportunity zones that want them to be designated as opportunity zones. So I think there'll be pressure to expand them, to look at some of these issues about making sure the communities benefit. But I think they'll be around for some time. But there needs to be more transparency, more information reporting, and that's what I think members of Congress are largely focused on right now.
Terrific.
Hey, John, I actually took the time to read all the Biden-Harris transition plans the other night. Yeah. And there's actually a section in there that talks about opportunity zones. Encourage you to read it. But what I got out of that section, which of course, remember, in a transition plan, they don't spill the beans on everything they're going to do. But the interpretation I got out of it as it relates to opportunity zones is that, in my words, they like the concept, but they want to push it into the cities that need it itself much more. So as opposed to expanding potentially, Ryan, at least my take, you know, the census tracts, I think they looked at it like, well, people are doing things, but it's not really in the mainstream of the area that we're really talking about for Americans who need to get a hand up. So the dialogue you'll read in there seems to point towards like the concept, but let's actually push it in to where maybe that apartment project that's being rehabbed isn't on the outside of the census tract. Maybe it's in the census tract, which really benefits the people that are living there and upgrades their quality of life. So at least from what I read the other night, I think they're leaning that way when it relates to opportunity zones.
There was some criticism, Larry, of the idea that a 2010 census was going to label some areas as eligible, that if you look at them even in 2018, you wouldn't call them eligible the way they were at that point. Did what you were reading suggest that what's needed is the updated census information, or more just an elimination of those adjacent tracts and a focus on others?
The transition papers, when you go through them all, they're thematic in nature. These people are politicians. I mean, you know, right now they're politicians. So it's very thematic. But so the theme is there. The nuances, as you always call them, John, or the how it's going to get done. No, that's down the road, as Ryan said, with, you know, Congress coming up with a plan that they're going to address, let's say, opportunity zones, and it goes to the Senate. And the Senate goes to their plan, gets their plan, and what do they call it? Reconciliation, right? Then they got to go back and reconcile it. But reality is, what I learned is more often than not, the Senate comes back, if it's unified, and says, you're going to do my plan. Okay, you Congress people, you're going to do what we want. So there's a long road to go on some of these subjects. But I just put it on the table for everybody on the call with opportunity zones. I have an inkling they're leaning towards contracting it into the areas that would truly benefit. That's my belief.
So guys, we have just a couple minutes left. I'll ask each of you to address the following question. And it's really, you've got, let's say, hypothetically, some time to spend on the issue. Would you be best served sort of managing your 1031 transactions defensively to try and guard against repeal? Would you divert your clients to opportunity zone investments if they have eligible gains? Or would you spend your time sort of getting ready for the wars? Larry, I'll start with you. And if you are advocating getting ready, what does getting ready mean?
Well, one, if I'm an investment advisor, at this point, and we do have to watch Georgia here on January 5th, but I don't see it going 2 for 2 Democrat. I just don't see it. I go through the numbers with you, but just real quickly for people on the call, in the one Democratic race between Senator Perdue and John Ossoff, the spread is about 1.8 in favor of the Republican. Remember, Joe Biden's ahead by 0.36, at least he was an hour ago. But you have to add in the Libertarian because the Libertarian people are not voting for the Democrat. If they vote, they're going to stick with the Republican, which makes the effective spread about 4 points. That's pretty big. The other one was more of a jungle primary. You had like 20 people running in there. But I parsed through all the numbers, and it looks like it's about a 51 to 49, 48, much closer program over there. So I'm with Ryan. You know, I think it's going to end up 51, 49 or 52, 48. I don't think it's going to be 50-50. Even the numbers don't support 50-50. So it's an uphill climb. And I don't think Schumer helped himself with his quote the other day that, I'll read it. Now we take Georgia, then we change America. I think he'll rue that day he said that, because I'm sure it's up on ads pretty soon. But I would be telling my clients, look, we're okay. We got a window. It's not there's no end of the world coming, and continue, because even if on the downside, if there is anything, it's 2022, not 2021. They're not going to look back. I wouldn't be playing defense. What I would do, since I am president of the DSA for a little while longer, is I would encourage all associations to have calls for action, doubling down on Dan. He's going to say the same thing. But But, stay with these people, get with the people that are coming in, build relationships, and that grassroots stuff, just for the people on this call who tend to be smaller people, it is our window for the next 2-3 months to pull together data on that front to substantiate that this, beyond being a contributor with Linga Petrova and NAREIT and all those people, we have real voters, real constituents that are not millionaires and billionaires. And I believe that's what we should be doing now. If we never need it, we never need it. If we need it, we got it. And I would do that. That's what I spend my time on. Not the investments, worrying about the investments. I don't think that's the primary place to be.
That's a good encompassing answer. Ryan, I want to thank you in advance for all your contributions today. I gave you, in a sense, the first word, so I'll give Dan, if you don't mind, our last and final word, since we are unfortunately out of time, but I want to give Dan, who we started with at the end of our list, the chance to close it out.
Absolutely.
John, thank you so much. And Larry, honor being on with you. And Ryan, we'll call you Sir Lancelot, Knights of the Roundtable. I would say people should go to www.1031.org. The Federation of Exchange Accommodators and Qualified Intermediaries. They got a great site put together that you can go through all the detail of what the Linga Petrova, Ernst & Young studies are that that Ryan is kind of heading up. And those are terrific to get aware of that. Get to know Google, who your elected officials are that we talked about, and you got a place to call into them and start talking about it. It's real that we can't just sit by and let other people do it for us. We have to all come together and do it, and it's a very important thing for all of us. Ultimately, what should people do? What should financial advisors do? Obviously, every client's different, but I agree with Larry that in general, and with Ryan, that people wouldn't have anything happening probably until after 2022 or the start of 2022. So if they're going to want to do a 1031, I would try to do it now and until then, until we know what's going on. But we have a few months, and the most important people on this call are Brooke and John, because they get to vote in Georgia.
And vote they will. Dan, thank you. Ryan, thank you. Larry, thank you. Real Assets Advisor and Brooke, thank you very much. And from the ADISA platform, we say to everyone who attended, thank you all for coming. I hope you got out of this what we tried to give you. And thanks again.